Alright, so I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into how the monster processor that I set up in Knime works. Hopefully it will make sense to you guys. If not, ping me, ask questions, what have you. So this is the monster processor. I broke it up into several components. First thing we have are a number of string variables that define where your source workbooks live, and also where your target is. So I've got a path to the base location of all of the Obsidian vaults. In this case, it's pointing to my demo area. My real ones live somewhere else. But my idea is going to be to have like a vault for rules, broken down by rule systems. So like one for AD&D, one for Sentinels in the Universe, one for Stargate, SG1 role-playing game, Dresden Files, number of them, right? And then you can give it the name of the vault. So that way, if you have your root, you just change your vault and then call things good. Your asset folder, your template folder, and then, whatever the target folder is going to be. Right now I'm using monsters, but I'm probably going to change that name to something else for me. The name that you're using for your folder note template, excuse me, your monster template name, and then here is where I keep the root path for all of my creatures. This is the specific creature that I want to import. This is where not only my workbook, but also where my images live. And then there's the name of the workbook, and then whether or not I want to overwrite all of the images. Even with like the 1,000 images or so that I have, the file copy doesn't take all that long. I think it's like under 15-20 seconds. It's just, they're just doing a bulk copy, so it doesn't really take all that long, but I'm trying to avoid a death by 1,000 cuts here, and there's no point in always overwriting all of the images if you don't need to. I currently have that set to true, but if you don't want to do it all the time, you just turn that off. Okay, so I had mentioned earlier that, let me go back in there. I had mentioned earlier that I have this overwrite value that's a Boolean here. In the copy file process, I'm using that Boolean. I had initially set Booleans for folder note overwriting and monster file overwriting as well. But since those are using a CSV writer doesn't know how to work conditionally, put it that way. So you have to do some processing to lead up to that. And that processing doesn't understand Booleans. I don't know why. It's kind of strange. So I had to use string variables instead. And I alluded to this in my previous video, but initially I had set those string values in this variable creator, and I gave them an initial value. But it didn't work. The Java snippet node that I would use to process them didn't work. However, the moment I moved that variable into the variable expression node, then everything worked fine. So it's a little weird that they're split out that way, but they are. And I think the other strange thing here was that this node, this guy doesn't let me set Booleans. So I kind of wanted all of the overwrite values to be in one node or the other, but it doesn't let me do that. So that's just kind of a quirk of Knime. You just got to kind of live with the quirks as they go, right? So anyway, so that's the variable creator node. Here's the variable expression node. This is being used with just string concatenation to build up a bunch of parameters. I have a date import parameter here. I have, and so that just sets the current date. I have a source path here. This is using the join with separator function to just build out our path to both the workbook, the monster template, the folder notes, and the image source. So these are all kind of based on kind of source path plus, or Obsidian path plus the vault plus the template plus the note. So it kind of builds on itself. And then again, here's those two override values here. So the only two things that will need to be modified really in here, depending upon your run, are these two overwrite values. I tend to leave the folder notes at false and then the overwrite monsters to true, because if I'm going to rerun this, it's usually because I screwed something up and I fixed some text in the workbook or what have you, and I want to rebuild everything. So that's what I do there. But I rarely muck with the folder names. So it's rare that I'm gonna like change the a.md to be something different. If I change those templates on the folder notes, then definitely I'll change this here. But other than that, I don't do that. Yeah. So then we get into this string to path node. What this thing is designed to do, here, let me see if I can bring up the text for what that is. No, not the outline. I think it's going to be here. Yeah. So this guy here is used to create path variables. In Knime, it's not enough to have like a string value that says c:\whack folder. It converts that into, I guess, like a handle to your local file system. I don't know exactly what their mechanism is, but their path variables reach out to specific file systems. So like when we come into here, you'll see that we're pointing to a local file system and we're referencing various paths. So it's converting these variables into path variables, and it's appending a suffix to the end of them. So this thing is very variable heavy. It makes lots and lots of variables. I'm not exactly sure why it needs to do that, but you know what? I'm not going to question them. They're the guys that set this up. So we end up making a whole bunch of variables here. Another thing that's very interesting about Knime is every step of the way, it is storing intermediary state. So like here on the variable creator node, I can, if I'm looking at this thing, I can right click on it. Sorry, I went a little faster. I'll do that a little slower. I can right click on this node. I can go down to, it's usually the last option on the properties dialog, and it'll either show like the flow variables that it created, or if you're building out a table, it'll show you the table values, that sort of thing. So if I come here and I look at the created flow variables, it shows me here is every variable that is coming out of this node and what their values are. And this is very useful for troubleshooting. So if we come here into the variable expressions node here, we can see all of the additional variables that we just created, the overwrites, the monster paths, and then you can also see that it's passing through the variables from the previous step. And then, you know, again, on the string to path, you'll see all of these path variables. And you notice that it says local, and then it has the path, and it's all in quotes. I'm presuming that is like a specific like Java object that they're using for that. But it's also, they also have a location suffix on them. So I mean, really, most of these paths that we created down here, I suppose are no longer useful to it because it now has the locations, but you know, all right. So anyway, so we get these guys right here. That's all of our prep and setup. And then all of those are going to get passed into these other nodes. And I think what I'm probably going to do is, I think I'm going to break this up and I'll go through each one of these separately, because we're about 10 minutes in here and that's taken a little while. So that way, you know, it's not just one big slog. Anyway, that's all the variable setup for the way the monster processor works. I'll do a quick one on the image files next. Thanks.